Hi, I'm Jimmy DeYoung Jr. and welcome to A Prophecy Moment. We've been showing you selected clips from our video, Revelation, a Walkthrough. This is a video that I produced with my father, Dr. Jimmy DeYoung, many years ago in the land of Israel. We're finishing up the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period and then now going into the second half of that 7-year period of time designed to bring the Jewish people to an understanding, to a knowledge that Jesus Christ is their true Messiah. So we'll pick up in the last 3.5 years of our tribulation period, culminating with the Battle of Armageddon up in the Jezreel Valley. As you watch our video, if you've been to Israel before, you'll be able to see areas that you'll recognize in our video. So we hope that you enjoy this. Revelation, a Walkthrough with Dr. Jimmy DeYoung.
During the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period, there will be 2 witnesses that'll preach, and 144,000 Jews will be born again. That's 12,000 of the 12 tribes of Israel. At the end of the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period, there will be a fight in the heavenlies between the angel Michael and Satan, at which time he will be cast out of the heavenlies down to the earth. Here at the edge of the Valley of Gehenna, just outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, I come to talk about what happens at the midway point of the tribulation period. I chose the Valley of Gehenna because, well, it depicts that everlasting fire that burns forever and ever. It's said that the area here at Gehenna had a fire that was continuous all the time. At the midway point of the tribulation, found here in the 12th chapter of the book of Revelation, we see that there's going to be a battle in the heavenlies. And there was a war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. By the way, the dragon, remember, apocalyptic literature will use a symbol to communicate an absolute truth. In verse 9 it describes who the dragon is. Verse 9 it says, "And that great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan." So it's a battle between Michael, the commander-in-chief of the good angels, and Satan, who is the commander-in-chief of the evil angels. Now they will be in the first heaven. That's the heaven right above us, the sun and the clouds. The second heaven, of course, the stars and the galaxies. The third heaven where God is. At the fall of Satan, he was cast out of the third heaven. Howbeit, the Bible tells us here in this passage of Scripture, in verse 10, that he has access to the throne of God to accuse the brethren day and night. But he's the only one of the evil creation that will have that access. The rest of the evil angels there in the first heaven will be gathered together by Satan, and they will fight with Michael and his good angels and be cast to the earth. The text tells us that those in the heavens rejoiced because he was cast out. But verse 13 says, "And when the dragon saw that he was cast onto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child." He will intensify his persecution on Israel, on the Jewish people, with an effort to annihilate them. If he destroys the Jewish people, he becomes God, because God's promise to the Jewish people is then negated. Verse 17 says, "And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went forth to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." The battle in the heavenlies between Michael, the army of the good angels, and Satan and his evil angels when he's cast to the earth, and will intensify his persecution upon the Jewish people in the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period. As we move now to the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period, in that last 3.5 years, the 7 trumpet judgments will take place. I'm walking here in the Jewish quarter located in the old city of Jerusalem. This is the plaza area. Much traffic as the people spend the midday here in Jerusalem. In my hands I have a shofar, the ram's horn, which in the Old Testament is used to describe the trumpet that would have been used to call a solemn assembly, bringing the people together at the entrance of the tabernacle are giving the direction for the children of Israel to continue on as they wandered through the wilderness during those 40 years. In the Old Testament, shofar is the word for trumpet. And at the beginning of the last half, the 7 trumpet judgments will take place. Those judgments, summarized briefly, would include 1/3 of the ocean turning to blood, 1/3 of the fish in the ocean dying, 1/3 of the ships on the oceans would be destroyed. Also talks about the sun losing some of its light. And then in the 9th chapter of the book of Revelation, you see how from the bottomless pit, Satan is given the key to release those evil angels that have been there for almost 6,000 years. The Bible describes them as locusts, not locusts like grasshoppers, but instead locusts as aliens that enter the Earth's atmosphere from outer space, from the heavenlies someplace where that bottomless pit will be located. They have the face of a man, the hair of a woman, the teeth of a lion, a breastplate like a horse running to battle. In addition to that, they have a tail like a scorpion, and they're given the capability to kill 1/3 of the Earth's population. That 4th sealed judgment kills 1/4 of the Earth's population, and now with 3/4 of the world's population still alive, 1/3 of them will die. 1/2 of the entire Earth's population destroyed as we go through the period, the last half of the tribulation period, and the 7 trumpet judgments. Also at the end of 3.5 years of the tribulation period, the 7 vial judgments will take place, culminating with the kings coming out of the east here to Jerusalem. I'm here in the old city of Jerusalem in a pottery shop, looking for a way to illustrate the vial or the bowl judgments, the last 7 judgments that take place in the last half of the tribulation period. Maybe this ancient pot will serve as a way of illustration. The judgments would be in the bowl or the vial, and they would be poured out on the earth. These are the last 7 of the 21 judgments, and they bring to a climax the terrible judgment of the tribulation period on the earth. The first of the vial judgments bring to conclusion those judgments, the trumpet judgments that began with 1/3 of the ocean turning to blood. Now all of the ocean turns to blood, and all of the fish in the oceans of the world will die. The sun gets so hot that it scorches man. It's so bad, this judgment, that instead of repenting, man blasphemes God, even gnawing his tongue to try to relieve his pain. In the 6th vial judgment, chapter 16, verse 12, the river Euphrates dries up, making way for the kings of the east to come into Jerusalem for that campaign of Armageddon. And then the 7th vial or bowl judgment, starting in verse 17, is the destruction of the city of Babylon. That will have been the headquarters in the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period for the Antichrist, ruling over a one-world economic, political, governmental system. He destroys Babylon, and then Jesus Christ comes back to the Mount of Olives, right here in the city of Jerusalem. The 7 vial judgments. The 7th of the vial judgments, chapter 16, verse 17, is destruction of Babylon, modern-day Babylon, where the Antichrist will be headquartered during the last 3.5 years over an economic, political, governmental system. I'm outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, just down from the Jaffa Gate. This wall that is around the city of Jerusalem is to protect it, as were the two walls that surrounded the ancient city of Babylon. Two walls that had a moat between. In order to penetrate this impregnable city, you'd have to scale the two walls, swim the moat, and then get into the city. Almost impossible to defeat the Babylonians. But the Babylonian Empire did fall in 539 BC. That's recorded in the book of Daniel, chapter 5, when Belshazzar, the king of the Babylonian Empire, fell to the Medo-Persians. But that was not the end of the city of Babylon. Though the Babylonian Empire fell, the city of Babylon has never fallen. The Bible tells us in Ezra chapter 7 that the scribe Ezra, living in Babylon 75 years after the fall of the Babylonian Empire, would make his way into Jerusalem. In the New Testament, 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 13, the Apostle Peter, following the command of Jesus Christ to go to the uttermost parts of the earth, he goes to the city of Babylon and there establishes a church. In fact, in the time of Peter, Babylon was the second most populated Jewish city in the world. With the exception of Jerusalem, it was the largest Jewish city. The Babylonian Empire fell, but the city of Babylon has never fallen. The Bible tells us in Isaiah chapters 13 and 14, in Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51, and in the book of Revelation chapter 18, in that last half of the tribulation period, Babylon will come back to power, and then it will fall. Chapter 18 of the book of Revelation tells us of the return to power of the city of Babylon, the location of the headquarters for the Antichrist during those last 3.5 years of the tribulation period. The Antichrist ruling over a one-world economic, political, governmental system in the city of Babylon. Here in chapter 18, the word Babylon is used 3 times, the word city 6 times, and the word great 8 times, speaking of that great city of Babylon. As Antichrist comes to power here and controls the economies of the world, and that's the reason, of course, that everyone who would follow the Antichrist would have to take the mark of the beast, 666 in the forehead, on the back of the hand, so he could buy or sell. That all headquartered, all of that merchandising headquartered in the city of Babylon. But at the last part of that 3.5 years, concluding the 7 years of tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble, Babylon will come under attack. The Bible tells us in chapter 18 and verses 10, 17, and 19 that in 1 hour Babylon will be destroyed. The record of that destruction is found here in chapter 16 of the book of Revelation. It is the 7th vial judgment. And the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, "It is done." And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since man was upon the face of the earth. The greatest earthquake to ever hit this earth takes place to destroy the city of Babylon. Babylon, the empire, fell. Babylon, the city, comes back to power, and it is the headquarters for the Antichrist, that one world economic, governmental, political system. Biblical Babylon, well, that's modern day Iraq. Babylon itself today on the shores of the Euphrates River, some 65 miles southwest of Baghdad, Iraq. Chapter 18, Great Babylon does fall. The last event that takes place in the tribulation period before Jesus Christ returns to Jerusalem. Immediately following the destruction of Babylon and that one world economic, political, governmental system in the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period, which the Antichrist will have headed up, modern day Iraq is devastated, and Jesus Christ then mounts his white horse in the heavenlies. We get on our white horses and we come back to the earth, and that is the revelation of Christ. When Jesus returns here to the Mount of Olives in the city of Jerusalem, the campaign of Armageddon actually begins. All the nations of the world gather here and then will go to the Jezreel Valley for the Battle of Armageddon. Many memories are rushing through my mind as I walk along this 2,000-year-old street dating back to the times of Jesus Christ here in the city of Jerusalem. This particular street adjacent to the western retaining wall of the Temple Mount. These stones behind me, evidence of the devastation of the temple, the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, and the dispersing of the Jewish people to the four corners of the earth. That took place in 70 AD. The attacking enemy, the Roman army under General Titus. It brings us to the point in our study of the book of Revelation of another time when the armies of the world will gather here at the city of Jerusalem. We often refer to the time at the appearance of Jesus Christ on the earth and then up into the Jezreel Valley where the armies will be gathered as the Battle of Armageddon. The term would better be used, the campaign of Armageddon. As we go to the book of Zechariah, chapter 14, we see how this unfolds. In verse 2, he says, "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to do battle." The armies of the world, and let's say just 100 nations of the world would be represented, and each of them having 1 million soldiers. 100 million soldiers will gather here in Jerusalem to begin the campaign of Armageddon. The women will be raped, the city will be devastated, half of the city will be captured. And then the Bible says in verse 3, "Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle." The heavens will open up. The text as we move over to the book of Revelation, chapter 19, verse 11, "And I saw heaven open, behold a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire." That reminds us of the person of Jesus Christ. "And his head were many crowns. And he had a name written that no man knew but he himself. And he was clothed in a vesture dipped in blood. And his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven," that would be us, those have been raptured and in the heavens with him during that 7 years of terrible judgment here on the earth, we would get upon our horses as he gets on his white horse to come back. "And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean." And then we must return over here to the book of Zechariah in verse 4. "And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. There shall be a great valley, half of the mountain it will remove toward the north and half toward the south." And those people, that army, that massive army, maybe 100 million soldiers, they will flee for the valley of the mountains. That's the Jezreel Valley, where the battle will continue. Well, there will be a period of time Jesus will change the geography of the city of Jerusalem, lifting it up, and then the Temple Mount itself, 1 square mile, about the size of the old city of Jerusalem, and Jesus will build his 21-story high temple, Messiah's temple, as described in Ezekiel chapters 40 to 46. He then goes to the Jezreel Valley. There in the Jezreel Valley, with a word he speaks, his voice like the sharp two-edged sword proceeds out of his mouth, and he casts them dead. At that point, those dead bodies have released the blood in their bodies and the bodies of the dead horses in that battle. It flows as high as the horse's bridle, extending all the way to the place prepared by God to protect the Jewish people during the terrible time of judgment here on the earth. The campaign of Armageddon beginning here in the city of Jerusalem.
Well, that concludes part 3 of our selection of this portion of the video, Revelation, a Walkthrough. One of the videos that my father and I produced many years ago in the land of Israel, a very simplistic way for understanding the book of Revelation, how it's taught, and how to be able to teach it to others. It's so very simple. You can go to our website, prophecytoday.com, and order your very own copy of Revelation, a walkthrough. As a matter of fact, take a look at all the other videos that we have, the audio series, and the books. I think you will find them very interesting in helping you to understand and to be able to further your knowledge of God's plan for the end times or the last days. Remember, as you've watched this video, we understand that the next event to happen on God's calendar, on his timetable, if you will, is the rapture of the church. That's the hope that is within us, looking for that blessed event of the rapture of the church. Thank you for visiting our YouTube site. If you liked it, please like it. If you subscribe to it. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe to it. And if you have a comment, you want to leave a comment, please do. We appreciate all of those comments that you leave for us. Thank you again. This is a prophecy moment, and you've been watching selected portions of videos from Revelation, a walkthrough.